Dead silence. Then, the low hum of a packed ballroom. Glasses. Laughter. Power. 600 people were in that room. Heads of state. CEOs. Billionaires who had never once stood in line for anything. They were dressed in a combined $2 million of fabric. They were waiting for her. In 4 minutes, Amara Cole was going to walk through those doors and become the first woman ever inducted into the Vanguard Billionaire Circle, the most exclusive private honor in the business world. 47 years of history. 81 inductees. All men. Until tonight. Her mother was in the third row. Her brother flew in from London. Her face was on the cover of 3 magazines sitting on coffee tables in that very ballroom. She had earned this. Every scar. Every sleepless night. Every door slammed in her face. She had earned this. And then. A knock at the dressing room door. Something slides underneath. She bent down. She picked it up. She opened it. And in 60 seconds, everything she believed about herself, everything her mother believed, everything the world was about to stand up and celebrate. Beat. Silence. Became a question she didn't know how to answer. This is the story of Amara Cole. And the night the truth arrived 4 minutes too late. Open Book Act 1, The Girl with the Folding Table, 0:55 to 5:45. Soft, warm _ Cincinnati. Memory. Amara Cole grew up in Vine Hill, Cincinnati, a neighborhood that the rest of the city had quietly decided to forget. The kind of place where the corner store closes at 7 and the school roof leaks in 3 classrooms and nobody fixes it because nobody with power drives through to notice. Her mother, Paulette, cleaned the overnight shift at a hospital cafeteria 6 nights a week. She came home smelling like industrial cleaner and reheated soup, changed clothes without sitting down, and left again for her second job at a dry cleaning counter by 7 a.m. She never complained. Not once. Not in front of Amara. There were 2 kids. Amara was the oldest by 4 years. Her brother Terence was small and bright and needed glasses by 2nd grade that took Paulette 3 months to save 4. Amara watched her mother do math at the kitchen table, bill by bill, dollar by dollar, with a pencil and a yellow legal pad, and she made herself a promise so young she couldn't remember making it. I will fix this. Whatever it costs me. I will fix this. She taught herself to code at 14 on a laptop she bought for $12 at a church rummage sale. Battery lasted 40 minutes. She learned to work in sprints. She built her first app at 15. A neighborhood safety alert system for Vine Hill. 3 people downloaded it, her mother, and a neighbor named Mr. Okonkwo who didn't fully understand what an app was but downloaded it because Amara asked him to. She didn't quit. She submitted her second app at 17. Her third at 19, while carrying a full scholarship at Ohio State and a call center job that paid $9.40 an hour and required her to smile at people who screamed at her for things she didn't do. Her third app got 300 downloads in 1 week. It wasn't much. But it was proof. The world could be moved. She graduated with a computer science degree and not a single job offer in her field. 3 rejection letters used the phrase, "not the right fit." One recruiter told her, off the record, that her resume read aggressively. She was 22 years old. She had $340 in her account. Her brother needed school supplies. Her mother's knees were starting to give out from years of overnight shifts. So she started Core Lynk Technologies, named after her grandmother, Cora, who used to say, "Baby, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. And a closed mind doesn't get free." Compliance software. Regulatory intelligence. Unglamorous, invisible, necessary work. She ran it from a studio apartment in Columbus. She slept for hours. She ate oatmeal for dinner more times than she could count. She told nobody it was hard. She told nobody she was scared. She performed certainty until she started to feel it. For 2 years, she barely broke even. Then came the Pittsburgh Tech Bridge Conference. She had scraped together $200 for the exhibitor fee and driven 6 hours from Columbus in a car that needed new brakes. Every other booth in that hall had a backdrop, a banner, a team. Branded swag. A screen running a polished demo reel. She had a folding table, a one-page brochure she had printed at a Walgreens at 11 p.m., and a laptop running a live demo of her software. At 10:15 in the morning, a man in a tailored suit stopped in front of her table. He looked at the brochure. He looked at her. He looked back at the booths on either side of her. And he said, not cruelly, just carelessly, the way powerful people say things when they're not thinking about who's listening. Compliance software from a one-woman shop. Cute. Then he kept walking. She watched him go. She did not cry. She did not pack up. She straightened the brochures, refreshed the demo, and stayed at that table for 4 more hours. At 2:30 p.m., Malcolm Briggs walked in. Music shifts. Warmer. More complicated. He was 61 years old, silver-haired, unhurried, the kind of man who had already made his fortune and spent the second half of his life watching what other people did with theirs. He moved through the conference hall slowly, hands in his pockets, nodding at the big booths without stopping. And then he reached her folding table. He stopped. He picked up her one-page brochure. Read it front to back. Turned it over. Read the back. Then he looked up and said, "You're undercharging by 40%. You're scared to ask for what it's worth. Stop that." He sat down. 2.5 hours later, he offered to become her first formal advisor. No equity. No strings. "I've made enough money," he said. "What I haven't done enough of is make sure people like you get where they're supposed to go." Amara would call that afternoon the turning point of her life. She had no idea how right she was. And she had no idea that the man in the tailored suit, the one who said cute and kept walking, was Reston Price. Open Book Act 2, The Rise, 5:45 to 11:30. Building _ Momentum. Drive. With Malcolm in her corner, things shifted. Not magically. Methodically. He introduced her to Phoebe Strand, the managing director of Meridian Partners, a venture capital firm in San Francisco. Phoebe was sharp, direct, and had a record of backing infrastructure tech that nobody else believed in until it was worth 9 figures. She offered a $4 million seed round within the week. Cora Lynk moved to Nashville. Hired 10 employees, then 20, then 50. Glass-walled office on Commerce Street. Amara stood at that window the morning they moved in and let herself feel proud. Just for a moment. Then she went back to work. Over the next 7 years, Cora Lynk became something no one had mapped. The compliance software expanded into a full regulatory intelligence platform. Fortune 500 companies signed on. Federal agencies began licensing the system. Forbes called her the quiet architect of corporate accountability. TechCrunch ran a cover, the billion-dollar fix nobody saw coming. She made the Forbes 400 at 31. By 33, her net worth had crossed $1.4 billion. She moved her mother out of Vine Hill. Paid Terrence's full tuition at Howard University. Funded 3 community tech centers in Cincinnati. Endowed a scholarship at Ohio State in her grandmother Cora's name. She gave loudly and deliberately because she remembered what it felt like to watch someone else get everything and feel invisible. And through all of it, Malcolm was there. He attended every major board meeting for the first 3 years. He called every Sunday morning, 10 o'clock sharp. He flew to Nashville the night before her first major government contract signing and made her walk through every clause of the document until she knew it cold. "You prepared?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Good. Then go to sleep." He was the father she had never had. She never said that out loud. But she thought it constantly. And she believed he knew. Malcolm Briggs died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in January. Gone by April. He told no one until he was already in hospice. Not even Amara. She found out from his attorney, Cyrus Hale, on a Tuesday morning. She flew to Pittsburgh that afternoon. She sat beside him for 4 days. She held his hand when he went. At the memorial, she stood at the podium and said, "Malcolm Briggs did not save me. He did something harder than that. He showed me that I was already worth saving, and then he refused to let me forget it." Not a dry eye in the room. 3 months after his death, the Vanguard Billionaire Circle announced her induction. First woman. 47-year history. March 15th. The Grand Aldrich Hotel, New York City. Tonight. That morning, over breakfast, her mother held Amara's hand across the table and said, "I used to lie awake at night listening to people call you lucky. Lucky scholarship. Lucky timing. Lucky to have the right people behind you." She squeezed Amara's hand. "Tonight, nobody will ever call my daughter lucky again." Amara looked at her mother. "Nobody," she repeated softly. She meant it as a promise. She had no idea those words were about to become the most painful sentence she had ever heard. Music drops. Cold. Low tension. Something is coming. She had been in the dressing room for 25 minutes. Stylist finished. Publicist gone. Coordinator had given the 10-minute warning. Amara was standing at the mirror adjusting the diamond bracelet her mother had gifted her when. Knock. Something slides under the door. White envelope. No name. One line on the front in black marker. "Read this before you go on stage." She stared at it. Instinct said, "Leave it." Experience said, "Nothing good arrives this way." But something deeper, the same instinct that had kept her alive through every version of her life she'd had to survive, made her pick it up. Inside were 33 pages. The first was a letter. Handwritten. She recognized it instantly. Malcolm. Long pause. The room contracts. Her hands were completely steady as she began to read. Amara. If you are reading this, tonight is the night. I asked Cyrus to deliver this at the right time. I am sorry for what you are about to learn. I am more sorry that I didn't tell you myself. But I need you to understand something before you read the next page. I did not do this to own you. I did it because I believed the world needed what you had, and the world was not going to notice on its own. She turned the page. What followed was not a confession. It was a ledger. Page 4. Meridian Partners. Malcolm had contacted Phoebe Strand 2 weeks before the Pittsburgh conference. He had emailed her Core Lynk's pitch deck with a handwritten note attached. "This woman is the real thing. Be in the room when she presents." The $4 million seed round was not a discovery. It had been prearranged. Page 9. The federal government contract, the one that had transformed Core Lynk from promising startup to national player, that contract had come through a former colleague of Malcolm's named Warren Osei, who sat on the advisory board of a federal regulatory commission. Malcolm had called Warren personally. Vouched for Core Lynk. According to the memo in the packet, had strongly recommended Core Lynk be added to the shortlist before the evaluation began. Amara had believed she won that contract on merit. On preparation. On product. On her. The product was exceptional. But the door had been opened before she arrived. Page 16. The Forbes profile. Malcolm had personally urged the journalist, a woman named Jade Whitfield, to make Amara the centerpiece of the story rather than a sidebar quote. Page 21. The Vanguard nomination. Malcolm had submitted her name with a 12-page letter, 18 months before his diagnosis. He had quietly lobbied 3 members of the selection committee. Called in favors he had been holding for a decade. The first woman ever inducted into the Vanguard Billionaire Circle. Malcolm had spent the last healthy year of his life engineering it. Amara set the pages down. She was not sure when she had sat down, but she was sitting now. Her back was straight. Her face was still. She looked like a woman made of stone. But inside, music, hollow. Something crumbling. Inside she was back at that kitchen table in Vine Hill watching her mother do math with a pencil. Back in that studio apartment in Columbus eating oatmeal at midnight. Back on every stage, in every room, in front of every girl who had looked at her like she was proof that it was possible. If I can do it, so can you. She had meant every word. She had believed every word. Had she? She turned to the last page of the letter. And this was the part she was not prepared for. There is something you need to know about the envelope itself, Amara. I did not send it to you. I left it with Cyrus with instructions for him to deliver it privately, tonight, so you could decide on your own terms. But Cyrus tells me there was a breach. Someone accessed my files. I do not know who. What I know is this: if someone else has seen what is in this packet and decided to use it, they will not wait until after the ceremony. They will move before you take the stage. Be ready. Amara stopped breathing for a moment. She turned back to the envelope. She had assumed Cyrus slid it under the door. But Cyrus was managing the guest list on the floor. He hadn't been near this hallway. Someone else had delivered this envelope. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your big night, Ms. Cole. The committee would be devastated to learn their first female inductee didn't quite do it alone. Enjoy the speech. The silence in that room becomes total. She read it twice. Then she understood. This was not a warning. This was a threat. Someone wanted her to walk onto that stage knowing they had the same information she was holding. Someone wanted her to stand in front of the world, accept an award built on a secret, and live the rest of her career knowing they owned that secret. Or she could break first. And lose everything before she even reached the podium. Open Book Act 4 The choice, 18 to 22:30. Tense, stripped down _. No warmth. Just pressure. She had 7 minutes. She called Cyrus. Did you send the envelope? A pause. No. I was going to bring it up after the ceremony. Someone else delivered it. And they texted me. They have the same information. Silence. Cyrus. I don't know who accessed the files. Malcolm's estate had a disputed clause. A former board member of his second company filed a contest 18 months ago. A man named Reston Price. He had access to discovery documents during the litigation. If he saw. Is Price here tonight? Another pause. He's on the guest list. Table 7. Beat. Amara closed her eyes. She knew the name Reston Price. He had been passed over for the Vanguard Circle 3 consecutive years. He had publicly criticized the committee selection process. He had once called her rise suspiciously frictionless in a business podcast nobody important had listened to. He had been waiting for this. She was the story he'd been building for years. 7 minutes became 5. She stood at that mirror again. If she walked out and said nothing, accepted the award, smiled at the cameras, let Reston Price's threat hang over her head, she would spend the rest of her career flinching every time she heard his name. Every interview. Every stage. Every girl she told her story to. If I can do it, so can you. She would know what she wasn't saying. And eventually, Reston would say it for her. On his terms. In his framing. Self-made fraud. The mentee who needed her mentor to build the myth. If she walked out and told the truth, the Vanguard Circle could revoke the induction. Self-made was not just a descriptor. It was a clause. Inductees were required to attest, in writing, that their success was achieved without institutional inheritance, legacy capital, or undisclosed financial arrangement. Malcolm's interventions, in their most clinical legal reading, could be characterized as undisclosed financial arrangement. She could lose the award on the same night she received it. In front of 600 people. In front of her mother. Tonight the whole world is going to see what you built with nothing. 5 minutes became 3. She sat with the weight of it. No music now. Just quiet. She thought about what Malcolm had actually done. He had opened doors. But she had walked through every single one of them and built something on the other side. Half the investors he'd introduced her to had still walked away. The government contract she'd still had to win, in a room full of people who doubted her. The Forbes story Jade Whitfield had still had to believe in enough to write. Malcolm had given her access. He had not given her the ability that filled the space access created. Nobody could give her that. Nobody had. And she thought about Reston Price sitting at table 7, waiting to watch her drown or lie, and finding something useful in either outcome. She thought about every girl in Vine Hill who had downloaded a program with her name on it. Who had read the Forbes profile. Who had believed that the world was a place where effort was enough. And she thought about what it meant to let a man like Reston Price control the ending of that story. She picked up her phone. She texted the unknown number back. Table 7. I see you. She put the phone down. She stood up. She straightened her gown. She picked up Malcolm's letter, folded it, placed it in her clutch. And she walked to the door. Open Book Act 5, the stage, 22:30, 28:00. Music. Grand. Ceremonial. But underneath, a wire pulled tight. Something unresolved. The doors opened. The room rose. 600 people, and the sound hit her like something physical, warm and enormous and real. She walked through it. Chin level. Step steady. Eyes clear. She found Reston Price at table 7. He was leaning back in his chair, phone face up on the table, wearing the small satisfied smile of a man who believes he has already won something and is simply waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked away and kept walking. Harlan Voss, the Vanguard chairman, met her at the podium. 70 years old. Trim. Silver-haired. The kind of man who had been powerful for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to be anything else. He began his introduction. Amara Cole represents everything this organization was built to celebrate. The self-made visionary. The architect of her own destiny. The woman who, with nothing but an idea and sheer will. And there it was. Built one of the most consequential technology companies of the last decade entirely on her own. The room applauded. Entirely on her own. Amara stood at the edge of the stage. Still. Waiting. Harlan turned to her, extended the crystal obelisk, heavy, engraved, her name catching the light, and said with a warm smile. Amara Cole. The woman who built everything alone. The applause swelled. And Amara stepped to the podium. She set the crystal on the surface in front of her. She reached into her clutch. She placed Malcolm's folded letter beside it. She looked out at 600 faces. The applause faded. Something in her stillness told the room to be quiet. She found her mother in the 3rd row. Paulette Cole, navy dress, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, hands clasped tightly in her lap, was already crying before Amara said a single word. Amara held her mother's eyes for a long moment. Then she looked at table 7. Reston Price's thumb was hovering over his phone screen. She looked back at the room. And she spoke. Before I say what I prepared to say tonight, I want to tell you something I didn't know until 38 minutes ago. The room shifted. The specific shift that happens when 600 people simultaneously understand something real is about to happen. For 10 years, I have told the story of how I built Cora Lynk from nothing. A studio apartment. A $12 laptop. Oatmeal for dinner. I have told that story to investors, to journalists, to classrooms full of girls who looked like I once did. Tonight, I found out that story was incomplete. Silence. Absolute. The man who mentored me, a Malcolm Briggs, who died 14 months ago and could not be in this room, did more than I ever knew. He arranged introductions I believed were chance. He made calls I didn't know were made. He opened doors I believed I had found on my own. I found out 38 minutes ago. In a letter he left behind. Delivered tonight, by someone who thought it would destroy me. Her eyes moved briefly to table 7. It didn't. A murmur moved through the room. Unsettled. Uncertain. People turned to each other. Phones came up. And at table 7, Reston Price stood up. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just stood. Straightened his jacket. And spoke in a voice designed to carry. Point of order, Harlan. The Vanguard Charter is explicit. Self-made status is a condition of induction, not a courtesy. If Ms. Cole is now admitting that her ascent was assisted, then I'd suggest the committee has an obligation to. The room fractured. Voices. Cameras turning. A woman near the back audibly gasped. Harlan Voss stiffened at the edge of the stage. He looked at Reston. He looked at Amara. For a long, terrible moment, he said nothing. That silence lasted for seconds. It felt like for years. In the third row, Paulette Cole's hands came apart in her lap. She pressed one against her mouth. She was not crying anymore. She was watching. The way a mother watches when she knows there is nothing she can do, and she is terrified, and she is proud, and she is terrified, all at once. Amara did not look at Harlan. She did not look at the cameras. She looked at Reston Price. Directly. Completely. Without blinking. And when she spoke, her voice did not shake. It did not rise. It was the voice of a woman who had been poor and doubted and dismissed and underestimated for so many years that this was not even close to the hardest room she had ever stood in. Mr. Price. The room went silent again. Instantly. You've spent 3 years calling my rise suspiciously frictionless. You filed a legal contest against a dead man's estate for access to documents you hoped would be useful one day. You had someone deliver an envelope to my dressing room 40 minutes before I walked on this stage, because you believed the truth would make me smaller. Beat. I want you to understand something. The truth does not make builders smaller. The truth only makes fraud smaller. She let that land for 3 full seconds. You are not standing at this podium tonight because you did not build anything worth celebrating. That is not my fault. That is not Malcolm's fault. That is not the committee's fault. That is the only thing in this room that actually belongs to you. Reston Price sat down. He didn't choose to. His legs just stopped holding him. The room exhaled. Amara turned back to the full ballroom. Her voice changed. Softer now. The sharpness gone. What was left underneath it was just truth. For about 15 minutes tonight, I hated the man I loved like a father. She let that land. I sat in that dressing room and went back through every year, every deal, every stage I ever stood on, and I asked myself the only question that mattered. Was any of it real? And then I remembered. Half the investors Malcolm introduced me to still walked away. I still had to be unforgettable. The government contracts I still had to win, in rooms full of people who had already decided I probably didn't belong there. I won them. Every pivot core LYNK ever made, I made it. Every employee who quit and came back, they came back for me. Not for an introduction. Not for a letter. For the work. Malcolm gave me proximity. He could not give me proof. That part was mine. But I also have to live with this. Other women, other girls who looked like me, who worked as hard as I did, who had the same ability and none of the access, they did not have a Malcolm. And they are not standing at this podium tonight. And I will not pretend that is coincidence. I will not pretend the system that kept them out is separate from the system that let me in. The story we tell about self-made success is almost always incomplete. Because we are almost always too proud, or too afraid, to name the people who held the door. I am naming him. Tonight. In front of all of you. Malcolm Briggs saw a girl at a folding table in Pittsburgh with a $12 laptop and a product the world needed, and he decided the world was going to know she existed. That is not nothing. That is not manipulation. But it is also not the whole story. And the whole story is the only one worth telling. She turned to Harlan Voss. He had not moved from the edge of the stage. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between discomfort and something older, something that looked almost like relief. I understand what I've just said may have implications for this induction. I know the charter. I am prepared to submit my full record, every deal, every decision, every door Malcolm opened, for the committee's review. If this organization decides I don't meet the standard after that review, I will respect it. Pause. But I will not accept an honor built on a version of my story that isn't true. Not tonight. Not ever. Then she looked at her mother. Paulette was completely still now. The hand had come down from her mouth. Her face was open in a way that faces rarely are in public, stripped of everything except what she actually felt. Mama. Amara's voice caught. Just once. Then held. This morning you said that after tonight, nobody would ever call me lucky again. Pause. They were right to say it. Not because I didn't work. But because lucky was the word people used when they couldn't bring themselves to admit that a woman who looked like me could build something that mattered. The truth is, I had help. Real help. The kind that cost something to give. Your 2 overnight shifts. Grandma Cora's voice in my head. Malcolm's quiet, expensive belief. Every person who said no and made me sharper. Every person who said yes and gave me room to grow. I did not build it alone. None of us do. That is not weakness. That is just the truth. 3 seconds of total silence. Then, 1 person stood up. Then 3 more. Then the entire room was on its feet. The applause was not what had greeted her entrance. That had been celebration, prepared, expected, performed. This was something older and harder and far more honest. This was 600 people recognizing something they had been waiting, without knowing it, to hear someone say out loud. Harlan Voss walked back to the microphone. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the standing room. Then he turned to Amara, and the discomfort was gone from his face, replaced by something that looked, quietly and genuinely, like admiration. He said, "The Vanguard Circle was founded 47 years ago to honor achievement." He paused. What we witnessed tonight is the highest form of it. He picked up the crystal obelisk from the podium. He placed it back in her hands. The award stands. Open Book Act 6, after 28:00, 29:30. Soft, warm underscore. Exhale. The storm has passed. At table 7, rest unpriced left before the dessert course. He did not post anything. He did not make a call. He did not speak to a single journalist on the way out. There was nothing left to weaponize. She had taken the bullet out of his gun herself, in front of 600 witnesses, and handed him back the empty casing. He never publicly commented on Amara Cole again. Her mother found her backstage. Paulette held her daughter's face in both hands, the way she used to when Amara was small and had woken up from a bad dream, and said nothing for a long time. Then, your grandmother would have lost her whole mind. Amara laughed. Fully. Completely. The way you can only laugh when the worst thing has passed. 3 days later, she held a press conference. She released a full public statement, unspun, unsoftened, acknowledging Malcolm's role in full. She asked her team not to clean it up. The response was not what her publicist feared. Hundreds of founders, executives, and builders came forward to name their own Malcolms. People who had never felt safe crediting their support because the culture of self-made success had made gratitude look like weakness. The conversation lasted weeks. It was the most honest public reckoning with access and meritocracy the business world had seen in a generation. 6 months later, Amara launched the Briggs Initiative, a formal program providing mentorship, direct capital access, and professional introductions to early-stage founders from underrepresented backgrounds. She named Cyrus Hale to its first board. At the launch, she said, "Malcolm left me something no amount of money can replicate, the understanding that being helped is not the same as being weak. And the responsibility to stop letting the myth of alone cost other people the help they deserve." She kept the crystal obelisk on her desk. And beside it, in a simple frame, one line from Malcolm's letter. "I gave you proximity. You gave them proof." She read it every morning. Not as a reminder of what she owed. As a reminder of what she was still building. Clapperboard outro, 29:00, 29:45. Music fades to near silence. One note, held. Amara Cole did not become less because she told the truth. She became the thing the truth always makes you, if you're brave enough to say it out loud. She became undeniable. Because anyone can look powerful when the story is clean. It takes something else entirely to stand in front of the world, at the peak of everything you have ever worked for, and say, "Here is what I didn't know. Here is the whole thing. Here is all of it." That is not a flaw in the story. That is the story. Music softens further. Almost nothing. Somewhere tonight, a girl is sitting at a folding table. She drove 6 hours to be there. She printed her brochure at 11 p.m. She has no banner, no team, no booth, just a product that works and a belief that the world will eventually notice. Someone walked past her today and said, "Cute," and kept walking. She straightened her brochures. She stayed. She is still there. And she is waiting for someone to stop walking past. Long pause. Maybe that someone is you. Before you go, tell me in the comments, who stopped walking past for you? Who opened the door nobody else would? Maybe today is the day you finally say their name out loud. See you in the next story.